you have that moment where you go, well, this is it. I remember thinking, we've survived this whole day and now we're going to die right now.
From Mamma Mia, I'm Mia Freedman and you're listening to No Filter, a podcast about people with fascinating stories to tell. When Louisa Hope walked into Sydney's Lindt cafe 5 years ago, she never expected her life would change within minutes. It began as a very ordinary day. But over the next 17 hours, Louisa and her mother were held at gunpoint and trapped, along with 16 other hostages, before the siege ended in gunfire and tragedy. If you're anything like me, I bet you remember exactly what you were doing that day when you heard that a terrorist was holding people hostage in a cafe in the middle of the Sydney CBD, mere metres from a TV station. But what went on inside the Lindt cafe that long day and dark night? And what happened afterwards to the survivors? How did they recover? Did they recover? Louisa Hope is one of those rare people I've met only a few times in my life. It's like she's lit from within. I'm not sure what it is, but this is honestly one of the most extraordinary conversations I've ever had. And Louisa is quite simply one of the most riveting people I've interviewed in the 4 years since this podcast began. Here is the very aptly named Louisa Hope. I know that Lee Sales interviewed you for her book, An Ordinary Day. It was an ordinary day.
Yes.
For everybody that was there. There was nothing special about it at all in the beginning. How did the day start for you and your mum?
So Mum and I we had come into town the night before actually because we had an appointment at the lawyer who happened to be in the same building as the Lindt upstairs. And Mum was out near the Blue Mountains living at the time. So we decided that we'd come in on the Sunday night. We stayed down at the Hilton and we just decided rather than deal with the traffic on the Monday morning that we would do that. And we had a lovely time together anyway. And so in the morning we had that moment where we went, will we go to the Lindt for breakfast or will we just stay here at the Hilton? What will we do? You know, tossing and turning the idea and decided we only wanted something small. So we went, of course, to the Lindt. We just, that sliding door moment. But so just random. But, really Mum and I probably were the people who should have least been there because
it wasn't your town.
No.
I mean, it wasn't your area.
No, that's right. We were very much in that wrong kind of place and the wrong story for us actually at that time. But there you go. That's what happens.
I'm so sorry about your mum. You lost your mum last year,
Thank you,
didn't you?
Yeah. That's right. She died in September. And for us as a family, we all feel that Mum was never the same after the cafe and we're very aware of that. But, we're comforted by the fact that she had a really glorious death and that was it was lovely really to all be together for that. But, yes, we imagined that we were going to have her for quite a lot longer because she was very vital and, go-go kind of woman.
Having come so close to death on that day, how was it different when, because you sliding doors moments again, you could have both lost your lives so easily in the cafe that day. How did it go in the end?
Well, the concluding moments, I don't know, some people would have watched it right to the end on television. But for us inside, the intensity and the adrenaline that just rushes through your body, it's so overwhelming. It's like you drip adrenaline in that moment. And I think that, actually, Mum and I both came out of the cafe we were later to discover assuming that the other was dead because we couldn't imagine how anyone could have survived. And, in the fact of the matter is that all of us were injured in the cafe at the end. Anyone who was in the actual cafe was injured. And sadly, of course, Katrina's injuries led to her death. So, but the moment of thinking that you're absolutely going to die right there and then, it's very real, you just sort of kind of have that moment where you go, well, this is it. This is really going to be it. I remember thinking, we've survived this whole day and now we're going to die right now. And so that's kind of like it just stops you in your heart and in your tracks, really.
Does your life flash before your eyes, like they say? Did you think of a person? Did you think of What did you think of?
No, I just thought, well, actually, what I thought was, oh, well, God, here I'm coming, ready or not, this is me. And there's no time now to make any adjustments or amends or try and do things differently.
Too late for a bucket list.
That's right, Mia. It definitely was too late for that bucket list. And it was kind of like, yes, well, here we are. It's going to end like this. So just the shock of that idea. But
where were you in that moment?
I was on the floor. Actually, and having been standing right next to the gunman, I kind of suddenly found myself on the floor. So, and I had my hands covering my eyes because the gunfire was so intense and it was just full on. And I actually had that thought, oh, well, I'm going to die right here and right now. I might as well watch, So I took my hands away and opened my eyes, but could hardly see a thing because the gun smoke in the room, and of course it was dark, made it so intense it was very hard to see. But, I figured I might as well watch. I was going to die.
What happened when the gunshots stopped?
That was really interesting. Because that's just how it was. It was this intense, which felt like, ages, just like a car accident, fast and slow at the same time. But when it stopped, it just stopped suddenly. Just, oh, okay, it's over. And I had that, oh, I'm still alive, and I'm kind of feeling my head thinking, am I okay? And because I had seen my foot in the hole in my foot already, and I realised that, and I thought, okay, it's just my foot. I'm okay everywhere else. Okay, and then I'm starting to slowly get myself up, and the next minute, one of the TAC team guys is over the top of me shouting, get up, run. And I'm like, I can't run, my foot. And he hauls me up, and at the same time he says to me, can you hop? And I went, okay, I guess I can. So, it was one of those crazy kind of moments, but, the TAC guy says hop, and you
hop.
Yeah, exactly. So,
Did you know where your mum was at that stage?
No.
How had you two become separated?
Well, we had been positioned on either side of him. So Mum was on the right side of him, closest to the kitchen at the Lindt, and I was on the left, closest to Martin Place side of him. And so we had gotten separated in the furor of what was happening at the end. So that separation was just like added to the. So once you kind of do the check, yes, I'm all in one piece, and then. They come behind me, actually, two of the TAC guys, because I was obviously slow, and scooped me up and took me out and just gently placed me on the road there in Phillip Street. And, I kind of had that moment of, oh, I'm alive, and the overwhelming gratitude, like, thank God I am still alive. And at the same time, but Mum must be dead. There's no way she could have survived because, I didn't know at that stage that Katrina was still in the cafe. I thought she'd escaped with all the others. And in a flash of a moment, I saw that Marcia was still there. But I just had assumed that it was just my mother and I and Tori that was still left there. That was all that he realised was there, the gunman. And so...
was everyone else hiding?
Everyone else had escaped. So they'd all escaped, and the escape, I'm so grateful that they had escaped because, if there'd been more of us in the cafe, there perhaps would have been definitely more injury, and perhaps more may have died.
I'm told that the people who did escape, many of them live with tremendous guilt.
Oh, if I could only just say to all of them, please don't be guilty. I'm so grateful that you got out when you did. And I think in hindsight, that was the smartest thing to do. I mean, certainly Mum and I, we talked about it afterwards, but we were all just waiting because we assumed the police were coming. So we're just waiting. The police will come. And so, yes, those who took the initiative to run, to escape the way they did, that was the wisest thing to do.
How did the gunman react every time he found out people escaped, or did he not realise?
Well, he was very aware that the first three escaped. Originally, like all of us in that moment, he thought that the police were coming in. And it was only the quick thinking of young Jared Moulton Hoffman who said that, no, they've escaped, that we all suddenly went from like off the Richter, tension and, everything was going nuts at the moment, in the moment. Then he just suddenly calmed down, realising that they'd escaped and that the police weren't coming. But what he didn't know was that the other two young girls had quietly escaped, just ever so quietly. It was amazing, really. So he didn't know that there were actually 5 that had escaped. He only thought that three men had escaped. However, and this is an important thing to be thinking about, on the day, the media were reporting every hour on the hour that 5 people had escaped. So we had to calm him with that by saying things like, oh, you know what the media's like, they just lie, they're exaggerating. Only 3 people have escaped. Now, this was important for us in the room because when those first three had escaped, he told us all that if anyone else escaped, he'd kill someone. So we're all on, high alert in a day that was already like ultra tense. That just sort of added to the tension. So every time the news reports were coming through, we had to calm him down by just saying, the media lie. But they were reporting a fact as it was true. However, it was impacting on us in the room. And if he had kind of like figured it out, then we could have really been in a dire situation.
The media had no idea that you had access, or did they? How did you have access to media?
On everyone's phones. We all have media in our pockets now.
So he didn't take everyone's phones?
He did. What he did was he asked us right up front, he said, put your ID and your wallets and your phones on the table in front of us, where we were all sitting. So we all did that. So, of course, but everyone had phones. And so as the day went on and he progressively was trying to get us to get him media attention, using our phones become a thing. Yeah. So, yeah, we all had, information all day, and everything that was being reported into us. So it's an interesting kind of thing for us to think about, especially for the media. How do we address this from a global situation? Whatever is being said in the media will, of course, we've just got to assume that it does, that will be impacting on a live situation. For example, very late in the night, early morning in London, BBC were reporting on what was happening in Sydney. So they were saying, we're listening to the report, and it was one of those moments when the BBC London saying, and we're watching live in Sydney, the hostage situation there, and we can see that the police are surrounding the cafe. And I remember absolutely holding my breath, because he thought that there were no police. He really thought that there were no police surrounding the cafe, that they're all like off at a distance, because that's what his demands had been. So, of course, we're hearing that. And I could actually hear my heart thumping in my chest, because I knew that if he realised that the police were surrounding the cafe from a report from London, the other side of the world, that once again we're all at risk. Fortunately, and I do not know how he missed it, it may have been he didn't catch the lady's accent, or he was fatiguing, or he was distracted somehow, and he did not hear that, and he did not react. But it certainly put me on edge, and Mum, everybody really.
When did you first become aware on that morning that it wasn't just a regular cup of hot chocolate?
It's just such a strange circumstance. I decided that it's time to go, and I went to pay for our breakfast, and the young girl who was serving me, I think it was April, and she said she was just there taking my money, and her mouth is aghast. I'm thinking, this young girl is not paying attention, but of course I'm paying her, and she could see, behind me, and she could see him standing up, starting to make his proclamation and putting his bandana on. And so by the time I turned around to go back to sit down, he's, like I said, putting his bandana on, and he's adjusting himself. He's making his speech. He's saying, I want you to know Australia's under attack, and I want to speak to the Prime Minister on national radio, and I've got a bomb in my backpack. And I'm thinking, in my head, I actually thought, oh, this is ridiculous. It's a joke. We're across the road from Channel 7. This must be some sort of like perverted kind of candid camera. But when he pulled out the gun, it was then, Mia, that I just like went, oh, it's real, this is real. And of course, you think in that moment, well, this is a terrorist action, and what do terrorists do? They kill you, right? You're dead. So it's just that adjustment of your reality, 1 minute I'm thinking about the rest of our morning, and the next minute, right here, right now, we're dead. But of course, that wasn't what he did.
Did people react in different ways?
Well, I think we're all just a little bit stunned, and everyone was very quiet and listening, trying to pay attention. The gunman himself was busy trying to articulate very clearly. He was obviously aware of his accent and was trying to articulate very clearly what his demands were and what he was expecting of us. So we all just were like in a state of shock, really. So there was no kind of screaming or anything like that. It was just, yeah.
Did he sort of try to organise you very quickly, or did you organise yourselves?
No, he was, he was instantly in control. Obviously the gun, threat of bombs, all that kind of thing. You know, the average Australian doesn't really have to do with those things. So we were, you know, all trying to work out how to do that. And of course, you must remember, apart from the staff, we were all random strangers. So it was just that really bizarre sort of circumstance. So we're all sort of listening, trying to hear what he's saying, doing what he's telling us. You know, I'm thinking, oh, he's going to line us up and shoot us in my head. But of course, like, obviously he didn't do that. So he started to say things like, keep your eyes closed. So he was very controlling of everything. Close your eyes, open your eyes. You stand here, you stand there. He quickly arranged people around the room, had people stand up on the bench seat there in the cafe so that they could be seen out the big windows, and people, you know, across the front. So it was pretty full on and intense in the, you know, immediate sort of starting. And then we waited.
Did you get the chance to talk amongst yourselves?
No, he was very controlling of all of that.
For the whole day?
Yes. So that kind of laxed a little when we all got with the program and that we all realised that what he wanted was media attention. So therefore we needed to be the ones to get that attention for him. So we're all just then scrambling, you know. Initially at one stage he had me ring 000, and he was happy with his with the phone call, and he said, oh, you can be my secretary. I mean, like, seriously. And then later on from that he told me to find ABC Radio on the phone. Well, so technically challenged, not the best with the phone at the, you know, most times, but in particular because I had forgotten my own phone that day, and so it was my mother's phone that was on the table. And so I'm trying to scramble and find ABC Radio on the phone. And I found ABC Radio Book Club, but he wasn't interested in the book club. So, you know, in that moment, young Jared quickly said, I'll do it, hand me the phone. So when I handed over the phone to Jared, it was like everything shifted, and Jared very much become the lead in the room. And so he quickly found radio on the phone and did all that kind of thing. And so the attention shifted very much to Jared, and Jared become, in a way, like the main man for the gunman. So it was really interesting, that dynamic, and I was so grateful because, you know, like, technology is not really my friend.
The pressure.
Anyway, yeah.
So Jared worked there?
Yes, Jared, young Jared was one of the young workers. He was 19 at the time. Many of them were only young, as was Fiona Ma. She's only 19. So, you know, yeah, they're just, well, I wouldn't like me to say it, but they're just babies, you know what I mean? Yeah.
Yeah, you need a millennial to get that job done.
Yeah, that's right. So they were there.
Could you communicate to each other with your eyes?
Well, obviously we were, but he was onto that. He was quickly onto that, and he was saying, who's looking at who? And certainly because once he realised that, you know, Robin was my mother, was totally separating us, and no talking with your eyes. And if he thought someone was looking too long at someone else, he was, what are you doing, you know? So he was certainly, definitely in the early stages, he was definitely onto all of that kind of thing.
The people then that escaped in little groups, how did they coordinate that?
You know, I think that they were just quick, and the three men who escaped initially, they were sitting at the front. They were lined up the front together on individual seats, and so they obviously were able to have little communications because their backs were to the inside of the cafe and they were facing out near the front door. So they're obviously able to have little communications together, and they quickly organised how they're going to do it, and they just did it. I mean, like, how brave were they? And so, yeah.
If you couldn't, I mean, you had a lot of time to fill in your mind. Did you kind of try to work out who was who and what their story was about?
We were all in our little groups, and so he separated us out from our groups, really, and put everybody everywhere. So that kind of like stifled communication between us. But as the day went on, and also because we were having toilet breaks.
How did that work? I was going to ask about the toilet.
Well, so thank goodness, really. I mean, one could almost say, inverted commas, that was a kindness. That worked because he just decided that we needed to, and I think really because it was obvious that because he had kicked away my walking stick from me to start with, and when it was time to go to the bathroom, I said, "Can I have my walking stick?" No. And then he said, "Fiona, you take Louisa," because he worked out our names, Louisa to the bathroom. So Fiona took me to the bathroom, and then we started this whole routine of Lindt workers taking us to the bathroom, predominantly Fiona or Jared. And so we were able to communicate in that way as well. So they were kind of like a conduit between us when we're going to.
Could
and
you
from
whisper
the
to them?
Yeah,
on
well,
the
the
way to
bathroom was, a little bit of a distance. So there was a degree of privacy there, if you like. Gosh, so weird. But yeah, that's how we were kind of like talking to each other. But we didn't have any kind of grand plan for escape or anything like that. We were just kind of like, I think, going to the bathroom, and young Fiona my goodness, he told us all to give over our phones. Well, she kept hers in her pocket. Brave as, that little girl. And, so when we got down to the bathroom, she said, "I've got my phone. Do you want to ring anyone?" But I mean, who remembers anybody's phone number these days? So I'm like, I'd love to, but I haven't got a clue anybody's number. So yeah, there you go. And that's how the day went.
I was also told that people became agitated at different times, and around the time of school pickup, Katrina became quite agitated. Is that true?
Aware, like she was aware. And, different ones with children were aware of their children, would mention their children, just different little things. And and try and negotiate a bit with, the gunman. There was just constant talk about who was going to get out and who was going to stay, and all that kind of thing. So, yes, of course, there was that whole awareness of people and their children, and the stress of all of that, just made the whole thing worse, I think.
Did anything sway him?
No.
I mean, you have MS and you had a cane, and then, people had children. Julie was pregnant. There were all sorts of different people with different reasons to be allowed to go. Was everyone sort of looking for what his vulnerabilities might be or what his kindnesses might be?
Yeah, definitely. There was a lot of discussion at one stage. He said that he would release a hostage, and which hostage would he release? So, of course, naturally you would think in a circumstance like that, everyone might be saying, me, pick me, putting up their hand saying, I'll go, let me, release me. But it wasn't like that, actually. Everyone was saying things like, well, you should release Robin and Louisa because Robin's old, right? And we're saying, no, you should release Julie because Julie's pregnant, or Harriet, who was pregnant at the time. And then, he was saying, but who's going to be my best spokesperson when they get out? And so, then we're saying, well, like Jared, he'd be really good at that. So there was all those kind of conversations, each of us trying to say, release this one or that one, and particularly I think we're all trying really to get the pregnant girls out if we possibly could. But at the same time, it was obviously his choice. He was just messing with us maybe, but there was a lot of coming and going and discussion. And of course, no one was released by him in the end because he wanted the media attention. We wanted to be able to get a direct connection to a media outlet so that he could say, I'm being so good and so kind by releasing somebody. And he wanted to get the credit for that rather than, he said the media could just say they've escaped if I don't get direct live coverage. So, that whole idea of somebody being released, eventually when we realised we had exhausted all opportunity for the media, it was like he said, why should I bother? Because I won't get the credit for it. The insanity of it.
Tell me about Tori.
Oh, Tori. Tori was the manager of the cafe. And unlike everybody else, he referred to Tori as the manager, which of course he was the manager. And this man who's still with me every day, he was very much highly regarded by his staff. They really loved him, But he, on the day, he went on a. He was aware that my mother was becoming more and more agitated, which she was. She was back chatting the gunman, and I was.
Was she?
Oh, yeah. And I was becoming more and more anxious.
What was she doing, Robin?
Well, she was. Oh dear me. So she was. Well, at one stage she stood up and hands on her hips and said, "I want to go to the bathroom, and my daughter needs her medication." Oh, Mum, just keep everything on the down low. I'm trying to, Mum, and when you hear your mother's angry voice, I could hear it coming. I'm thinking, oh man, are you in trouble? Anyway, she just had that moment. And so he sends her off to the bathroom with Fiona, and then he wants to know all about my MS. What's MS? So he calls me over, sit next to him, and he gives me 20 questions about why have you got MS, how do you get it, what's it do, and I'm trying to explain very soundly and reasonably the intricacies of MS, and I'm thinking, gosh,
That's quite a human moment. And
Exactly.
confusing to you. Like, I imagine that's
Exactly.
confusing because he was showing interest and...
Yeah. And this is the thing about this man, right? And this is the thing that I keep coming back to and I keep talking about, and that is the fact that he was a bad man doing a bad thing. What he was doing was just so wrong and violent. A violent act to hold somebody against their will with a gun. But at the same time, there were flashes of his kindness and his humanity. So we kind of go, what is that? Who is that? This duplicitous, double-minded man. Here he is letting us have toilet breaks and later on cups of tea and food and, water.
Inquiring about your health.
I know, exactly. And he was sincerely interested. I'm sure of that. There was no need for him to kind of like do a little deviation into his plan to have a chat about my MS. And then, he's very interested in it. And then he says to me, at any time, Louisa, you want to have your medication, you just do it. You don't have to ask me. Oh, thank you. Oh, thank you, brother. But so here we go. Here's this man expressing two different parts of his personality. And you think, what is that? Double-minded, duplicitous. And you sort of think to yourself, well, that's that man who assaults his wife, bashes her to a pulp, and then at the same time tells her he loves her. So, we think that we cannot imagine what a terrorist is like, but we experience in our ordinary everyday life that kind of man or that kind of person. So and I say this because whilst ever we throw our hands in the air and say, he's not us, we're not that.
He's a madman.
Yeah, that's right. He's a madman, he's a lunatic, he's crazy. Then what we're doing is actually surrendering our opportunity to understand what this is all about. How does the violent mind really work? And so for me personally, I kind of have been on a little bit of a crusade in saying we have to grab this circumstance and actually get beyond our fear and start to do some real research to come to real understanding, because it's only in that we're going to undo what this thing is. And so, there we were in that circumstance with him all those hours. And this was the reality of him, no different to us in many ways.
Do you now see him as crazy, mentally ill, evil? How do you see him?
All of those words are too easy, actually. We need a little bit more of nuanced kind of understanding of him. And I see him as a very flawed human being whose primary motivator was his own self-delusion and his narcissistic frame of, obviously, his existence. Because, there's lots of other things in this man's history. I mean, at the inquest, we found out that he had 48 separate individual sexual assault charges against him. And, of course, there was his involvement in the death of his ex-wife, which was horrendous. And so, the man was, one could very easily call him evil, but that was not the only cloak that he wore. So we have to get in and nut it out to see what he really is. Yes, even madmen can be sane. And to sort of box and dice somebody into a little hole like that, too simple and of no value to us now.
So there he was inquiring about your MS. Your mum had demanded to be taken to the bathroom. And where was Tori through all of this?
Well, Tori, he had placed mostly the women around him close and all the men at a bit of a distance. So
to use the women as human shields, because
that's
he felt that there was less likely to be someone firing through the window.
Yeah, well, that, and also women, he was assuming obviously, and obviously the way he's dealt with women, he was probably feeling more confident that he could keep control of us. So anyway, Mum had a few bit of back chat towards him, and then as the day went on, a little bit later, Tori had gone for a bathroom break and he came back, and normally we came back and sat back in our normal seats where we were last seated. But Tori actually come back and positioned himself sitting right next to Mum. And what happened then was that they were seated on the bench seat with a table in front of them, and I was on an individual seat separated slightly from them. But where he'd positioned himself next to Mum, I could hear them just quietly whispering, having little jokes. I could hear little giggles. And when I had got another bathroom break myself, come back, I could see them holding hands under the table. So Tori had used that as an opportunity to sit next and position himself next to my mother to calm her. And I could see that worked, because Mum was far better. Because there was one stage when the gunman actually said to me, "Louisa, keep your mother quiet." And in the moment I thought, you're crazy. How am I going to do that? Keep my mother quiet.
Big ask for a daughter.
Yeah, exactly. And so, here I am, a grown-up, but I had that moment where I had to say to Mum, you're an old lady, just keep quiet. And I could see her looking at me, and I'm thinking, she's kind of like, wait till you get home, you're in big trouble kind of thing. And I'm just sort of thinking we've got to, but I knew that we just had to keep her calm. And Tori obviously read that too, because he'd come back after that. And like I said, he positioned himself next to her. And of course, at the end, when everyone else escaped, and I had my eyes closed, I was in this intense place of prayer actually, and then I'd heard this big bang, and I'd opened my eyes, and all of the others, they'd escaped, all the other hostages, and I went, oh right, this is it, we're going. So I stood up and I started to go towards the door, but Mum and Tori were not moving. And I was trying to catch their eye. I kept turning around, not wanting to speak because I didn't know where the gunman was, didn't know what was happening with him. So I'm kind of trying to indicate to them, come, we're right at the end now. And I'm trying to get their attention, but they weren't moving. I'm thinking, why isn't Tori moving? Why isn't Mum moving? They're just not shifting. And so in that moment, I just thought, well, I can't leave my mother. So I lay down on the floor and thought, the gunman will kill me. And then that situation went on, but later, after 12 months later, after the first anniversary, Mum and I were having a quiet moment at home, and I said to her, Mum, do you remember at the end, and I'd got up and was going towards the door, I said to her, why didn't you and Tori run? Because I could never understand why Tori didn't run. And my mum said to me, I was saying to Tori, you go. And she's making this motion. She was elbowing him in the side saying, you go, Tori, you go. And he said to her, no, I'll stay with you. So in that moment, 12 months after the event, I suddenly realised that Tori Johnston had made a deliberate choice to stay and look after my mother, which, is, for our whole family, that is profound. And I understand the grief that his family must feel that his brave heart made that choice in that moment, because if he had not, he would not have been there to be the one who was killed. So, it's just, it's hard, and I feel for his family, but I think to myself, what an amazing, brave young man And, you know, his parents, his mother, and of course his partner Thomas, his bravery doesn't replace him for them. But, you know, our family, we are forever grateful because in lots of ways, you know, that gave us 3.5 more years with our mother. And it's, you know, it's in my heart.
Why do you think that the gunman chose Tori?
Because Tori was the last man in the cafe and he was the final authority figure. So he called Tori to, you know, he'd positioned Mum and I either side of him and told us to keep our eyes closed and we wouldn't get hurt. I mean, ridiculous really, as if you'd do that. But then he called Tori over.
Do you mean as if you'd keep your eyes closed?
Yeah, that's right.
So you didn't keep your eyes closed?
No, it was dark in the cafe and we're either side of him, Mum and I. And then he called Tori over and said, you, manager, kneel on the floor and put your hands on your head. And it was just that moment of, oh, my God, you know.
I don't want to ask you to relive that moment, but Louisa, how do you get over any of this? Like, I look at you sitting in front of me and I know people go to war and that's essentially what you did. How do you do it? How do you recover?
Everyone's experience is different. And trauma, and we talk about post-traumatic stress. And, you know, trauma is a really bizarre kind of thing. And for me personally, I think that this is my experience. Mum's experience was very different. But for me, I went into a place of post-trauma, like I was so overwhelmed with the gratitude, so grateful that I'd been spared in that moment, so grateful that there was a future, and so grateful, you know, Mum was still alive and, you know, and also that I could have a refocus and I just had that determination that we were going to get something good out of that awful situation. So for me, I feel in hindsight now that I went into a kind of post-euphoria and that pushed me forward. And that, of course, I have to say comes from, you know, my practice of prayer, my practice of faith, and all those things that were already in my life and were part of, you know, my inner life. And so all of those things built into that. And but at the same time, and equally as potent, I have to say, is the overwhelming anxiety. Now, this is really interesting how we think about anxiety. But for me, I understood how I felt immediately in those final moments. And when I say the adrenaline was dripping out of me, physically I could feel like my entire body was engaged in the adrenaline and I could feel it and I was just maxed out. There's no other way to describe it, maxed out. And it was almost like my brain was expanding. And so what happens for me now, 5 years later still, I can find that I can be some sort of circumstance. It could be traffic or it could be any little moment, no random reason, but anxiety comes instantly from like 0 to 100 in an instant. And I can recognize it's in my body and I go, yes, I know my body has gone from 0 to 100 to 1,000.
To fight or flight,
yes,
back into that
exactly.
adrenaline
and it's
memory.
right there. It's the same feeling that I experienced in that moment at the end. And I haven't worked out how to turn it off yet, but I have worked out how to still my heart and just control myself as opposed to, okay, I'm here and then I'm there. And some days I can be good at it and some days I'm not so good at it. And I'm very blessed because I'm surrounded by family who understand and friends who are, you know, under control. And sometimes it's a moment where a friend will sit and just, we'll have a little quiet sit and we'll have a pray. And sometimes it's a moment where I, you know, go into a meditative state or, you know, just do the breathing that's associated with calming myself. So there's all little tricks that you can use for that, but it's very real. The thing is, anxiety knows no level in that. So I had an experience that was pretty tense and out there, But, anxiety is the same for the woman who's just been assaulted in her own home, or for somebody who's facing a traffic accident, or somebody who's having a stroke. Anxiety is no respecter of persons, and we all experience it in our own individual way, but the same. So, if someone tells me they've got anxiety, I can really relate. And it doesn't matter what caused it. Doesn't matter. It's all the same. So, we need to be kind to each other sometimes, because we don't know what someone else is going through.
There's something that happens. I always assume that anyone who experiences a tragedy has post-traumatic stress and post-traumatic syndrome. But I learned through reading Lee Sales's book that, and actually through people that I know, not everyone has that. Some people have post-traumatic growth, which is a little bit like the euphoria is probably a different stage. But the post-traumatic growth is when my friend who had a stillborn baby described it to me as that the death of her daughter turned the light up in her life, not down. And she didn't expect that. Would you say that that's been what this experience has done to you? Has it turned the light up in your life?
God bless your friend. That is such a beautiful way to express that. And that's really exactly how it really feels. I found that for me, I felt like I expanded as a human, as a person, so that my capacity was more. So, I equally feel that expansion of self and my capacity to cope with more in many ways, coupled with the balancing effect of, all that random anxiety and distress and pressure. So it's very finely tuned and needs to be very finely balanced. But if I look forward and focus myself that way, it very much is about that. So now I feel like, okay, what else is out there that we need to fix, change, grow, evolve? What are the other things that need to be looked at post-siege, that business that we need to do as a society within our institutions? And of course, for me as well, being involved with the nurses. So, it's just, I feel like there's no place to say no anymore. We just got to go forward.
You started a foundation to help nurses. Tell me about your time in hospital after the siege.
Wow, hospital. Okay.
You were there for a long time, Louisa.
I was. It just was full on.
Seems unfair after what you went through.
I know. It was that kind of, you just don't imagine that, like seriously, I thought, okay, well because I thought I was going to lose my foot. I really had that moment.
Well, it had a hole in it.
It certainly did, And
what did it look like when you looked at it?
Well, it was pretty. When it was first done, it was just like horrendous. Like I used to go in a little state of shock whenever they redressed the wound, because it was just the shock of seeing it, But of course, now it looks like, I describe it as someone's got the Barmex and gone zhuzh zhuzh on my foot. It's just it's a classic honeycomb wound, and it's messy, just to say the least. But 3 months in hospital was not what I expected. I thought I'd be there 2 weeks, By the time I'll be out, and I thought I'd be out for New Year, Christmas. That didn't happen, and it just kind of extended.
Because you needed operations and reconstructions.
So that's right. I had 3 surgeries, and then of course rehabilitation. And so I went from Prince of Wales to a private hospital in the eastern suburbs, and so that was a long time in hospital. But that time gave me, really. You don't think about it in the moment, but in hindsight, I realised it was like a blessing, because it insulated me from the world immediately after the siege, and it gave me time for reflection and to think forward. And also my experience with the nurses then sent me on that journey. And so when 60 Minutes were discussing, if we're going to talk to them, and like my mother and I knew from the go-get that we would have to share with everyone, because we knew that if we'd been on the outside, we would have wanted to know what happened to the people on the inside. So we understood that. And also because I personally felt that we were all part of what happened that day. Like, this was not something that happened to just me and my mother and my fellow hostages. It happened to the whole country. So we had to be accountable for that. So anyway, when 60 Minutes generously gave me that $25,000, and Mike Baird matched that money, had little 50 grand in my hand, and I kind of thought, right, I know what I wanted to do with it, because I was going to do a little – I thought originally that I'd just do a little fundraiser for the nurses within my own community, and we'd get a few grand and I'd give it to the nurses on my ward. But 50 grand was a whole lot more money. And so I went to the foundation at Prince of Wales, and the Lulu Salapa, who was the CEO there, brilliant, amazing. That foundation runs like a machine, I've got to tell you. So, of course, Lulu had been a nurse in a previous life, and so she knew exactly what I was saying when I said, I don't want this to go for carpet or for new paint in the hospital or anything, or in the boardroom or anything. I want it to be for nurse-initiated projects, and she absolutely got that. She knew exactly how to create that, make it happen. And so that's what happened. And, of course, once I started to see what the nurses were doing with the money, I couldn't stop. You know, I just had to keep trying to raise money and raise awareness of the nurses and what they do for us. So, you know, I could rave on about this for hours because it's my happy place. But, yeah.
That's part of your post-traumatic growth also, right? Finding a way to channel this thing that happened to you that was so shocking into something positive.
Well, you know, it really was an answer to my prayer in many ways, because I so wanted something good to come out of this. And now I realise that the good is not going to come through me. It's going to come through the nurses and the work that they are doing, because the nurses, all of their projects are about, you know, how to help us as patients. And that, of course, is the universal focus of nurses. And so, yeah, I just have the privilege of being involved in that. And I'm just like, my goodness, how blessed am I, you know.
It's funny what you just said about how you recognise that it's something that happened to all of us, not just the people in the cafe, which sounds almost arrogant particularly when you think about Tori and Katrina and the families that they left behind, and all of you that were in there. How did you sort of become aware that we do all sort of need to process and to tell you where we were that day and what our connections? I mean, the first thing I did when I met you this morning was tell you how I had connections to Tori and how I had connections to Katrina. It's a lot to take on, how that affected the kind of the national psyche. How did you become aware of it?
You know, well, I think that, like I said, you know, I was very aware. Well, you know, like I know how we would have been, my mother and I, we would have been outside the cafe praying for people. We would have stayed up all night. We would have waited with them. A nurse once said to me, you know, about a week and a half into my stay at the hospital, she said, even though I was on morning shift, I had to stay up to the very end and watch on the television. She said, I couldn't leave you in there alone. And I thought, oh, yes, I understand what she's saying about that.
None of us wanted to go to sleep that night.
Yeah, see, you know, we didn't want to
leave you.
That's right. And so I think that if we recognise this as something that happened to all of us, and when you think about what happened in Martin Place after, you know, I was in hospital and it was on a self-imposed media blackout, but friends were bringing me news and telling me stories and photographs. Flowers and people. They're telling me about random strangers sitting and talking and praying and, you know, Muslim people being there and everyone sharing together. And, you know, of course, the Ride With Me campaign that happened afterwards. So all of that stuff, you kind of, I think it very clearly made it obvious that we were all in this together. So therefore we had to find a way to recover together. So for me, that's really important. And part of that is telling our stories to each other. And so I have great respect, you know, people come and tell me. And, you know, Lee Sales's book, of course, you know, she talks about things like that but we all had an ownership, did we not, in Thredbo and what happened to Port Arthur. So we all have a part of it. And if we think that it's just, something that happened on a news cycle, well, actually it's not, because we're all impacted by these things. So how do we recover together?
That's incredibly gracious of you to understand that and acknowledge it. And I'm going to guess that people would have two reactions in terms of the hostages. Some, I imagine, would want to stay in touch and feel very bonded, and others would want to just walk away and never look back. Is that how it's panned out with those of you who were there and lived through that?
Definitely. You know, we're all separate individuals with individual lives and stories, and, you know, sometimes contact is a reminder of that day, and that's just too hard. And, you know, I totally respect that. And, you know, my heart's always, you know, are you okay and how are you doing and all that kind of stuff. But I also am aware that I myself don't want to be an inflictor of further pain. So, it's really hard to kind of just walk that fine line between respect and care. So, yes, you just have to, hands off and wait, really. So, yeah.
Do you stay in touch?
A few of them I do, yes, definitely. And I value that so much. And I'm always keen for any news of anyone else, but just so don't want to invade them, because we're 5 years. And so, so aren't we, inverted commas, over that already? But it's not like that. It's never over, actually. And so, never be over for the families, but equally, you stand up and you dust yourself off and you get on, but it's always there.
Louisa, I just want to thank you. I mean, I understand that so many of the survivors from that day and the families have wanted to retreat, and you haven't. You've kept being out there and speaking to be of service and to help us collectively process this, as well as trying to use it for good and raise money for your foundation and to help nurses. You are such a force of good in the world. Like, for everything that he was, a force of dark, you are that opposite and that equalising and, exceptional force of good. And I just wanted to say thank you.
Thank you, Mia.
Oh, I hope that the incredible, luminescence of Louisa came through in that interview in the same way that it did in the room. We were all in tears. My producer, our person behind the camera, and the guy that came along with Louisa as her sort of support person, because she walks with a cane and her foot's bandaged, but she had this beautiful bright orange patent leather strappy sandals around her foot, and she was wearing this gorgeous floral dress, and she was telling me this amazing story of how the day before she'd been in the city and she'd fallen over, and she said that's something that happens not infrequently because of her foot, and she sometimes loses her footing. And she was in the middle of the street and a guy came to help her, and he said, he noticed that she had a bandage on her foot, and he said, are you okay? What happened? And she said, I was in the Lindt siege and I got some shrapnel in my foot. And he said, oh my God, my son is best friends with Katrina Dawson's son, and I just dropped both the boys at camp. And of all the people who could have come to help her in the middle of a city on an ordinary day, I don't know, makes you wonder. As you heard, towards the end of the siege, Louisa was injured. She got shrapnel in her foot from all the gunfire, and afterwards she was taken to the Prince of Wales Hospital here in Sydney, where she spent 3 months as a patient. And she was so moved by the care and the compassion that she received there, she decided to take this tragedy and turn it into something positive, and she created the Louisa Hope Fund for Nurses as part of the Prince of Wales Hospital Foundation. To donate to the Prince of Wales Hospital Foundation, Louisa Hope Fund for Nurses, please visit powhf.org.au, and we'll put a link in our show notes. This episode was produced by Bridget Northeast, and to the families of Katrina Dawson and Tori Johnston, we extend all our love and our deepest sympathies. Katrina and Tori are not forgotten.
Hey, it's me just jumping back into your ears with no voice now. Since we recorded that interview with Louisa last week, we've also done another interview about the Sydney Lindt Cafe siege more generally with a journalist called Deborah Snow, who's written a book on it. We did it on our podcast, True Crime Conversations. Jesse Stevens did that interview, and it fills in a lot of the blanks that you might have and a lot of the questions that you might have after listening to Louisa's incredible story, because I really had to make a decision when I was talking to her what I would talk to her about. Like, I could have talked to her for 100 years, really. She was so interesting. But there were things about the gunman, about his history, about the police response, about some of the TikTok and what happened step by step during the day that we just didn't cover. So this other interview on our podcast, True Crime Conversations, you might want to listen to it. You'll find it wherever you find your podcasts. And we've actually done it in 2 parts. The first part is a little bit about the gunman, or a lot about the gunman actually, and what happened before the siege. And then there's a lot about the siege itself in our second part. So have a listen to that.